Well, unfortunately, they can't all be great. Now, is this movie bad? No, I don't think this movie's bad. But compared to the previous two movies in this Hammer series of Frankenstein films, it is a pretty big letdown. Now, it's still fun. It's still a fun watch, especially if you are a classic horror fan. But I definitely expected more, especially considering the fact that this is a team up movie with the company that made those classic movies that I love so much. So, yeah, this is going to be a bit of an uneven review for an uneven movie, and I do have a pretty long winded explanation for this one, so strap yourselves in. This one might take a while. What's up? What's happening? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Animation Station, which is it for anything animation, including TV and movies as well. I am your host, Jackson Small. Welcome to another installment of Return to 31 Days of Horror, and welcome to the third movie in the Hammer Frankenstein series known as The Evil of Frankenstein. Now, whereas the first two movies had a nice continuous continuity, and the second one even had a nice little ending that left the door open for so much more to happen, for whatever dumbass fucking reason, they decided instead to throw that all away and just reboot everything. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea, but they did it. And unfortunately, it's not the last time they did it either, because we have another reboot in this series too. Horror of Frankenstein. But I'm just gonna say it right now, I'm not reviewing Horror of Frankenstein. I don't consider it a part of the series, outside of the fact that it has two actors from the actual mainline series, those being Veronica Carlson and Dave Prowse, who many of you know as Darth Vader. Not the voice of Darth Vader, the physical embodiment of Darth Vader, the physicality side. So, yeah, definitely a bit of a pretty disappointing movie, but I still think it's fun. It kind of falls into the guilty pleasure category, but I do have a decent little argument against it for those calling it like the worst of the Hammer series, which it's not. The last movie of this series is the actual worst. So, without further ado, delay, or any of my meandering, let's dive into this movie. Here is my written review for Evil of Frankenstein. Well, they can't all be great, unfortunately. After two fantastic movies with Curse and Revenge, Hammer decided for whatever baffling reason to just needlessly reboot the series and start from scratch. And even weirder, they decided to actually team up with Universal Pictures to make the monster look more like the traditional one that we all know, making this movie a co-production between the two companies. Yeah, Hammer teamed up with Universal. That should be like a horror match made in heaven, but for whatever reason, it ended up just being a confusing partnership. Not to mention, this is the one and only time it happens in all of Hammer's history. So, it's really weird. The only connections that this movie has to those previous films is that Peter Cushing is still Frankenstein, and his assistant is still named Hans, despite not being the same character for Revenge. Yeah, the Dracula movies from Hammer have the same problem, where they name a certain character the same name a certain amount of times. With the Dracula movies, it was always Paul, but with the Frankenstein movies, it's Hans. Because, spoiler alert, it's the same name of another character in the next movie. Make of that what you will. Terence Fisher wasn't even brought back to direct this new installment. Instead, it was given to Freddie Francis, who's directed a fair bit of Hammer movies. Which is even more weird, because Fisher himself would be back later to direct the rest of this series. Like, why for this one installment was Fisher not allowed to direct it? I don't know, that just seems weird to me. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, this one has way more flaws than the previous two. The story is a complete mess, with pretty much no originality whatsoever, and instead blatantly copying even more stuff already done in the Universal movies. Such as finding the monster in ice, which is taken from Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and the monster being used as a killing machine, just like Igor did in Son of Frankenstein. The monster is a very poor imitation of the Universal version. No offense to the makeup people, I'm sure they tried, but It does not look good. I'd argue it's one of the worst looking monsters of any Frankenstein movie. It is bad. And so, what else? Many elements are just completely thrown out the window during the actual movie itself. Like, for example, there's a side plot about Frankenstein trying to solve his belongings from his old laboratory to fund his new experiments in his new location. But what's stupid is that this is thrown out the window immediately because the laboratory was ransacked as soon as he left, meaning he goes back just to see destruction. Yeah, throw that plot out the window right in the middle of the damn movie. And so much of it just makes no sense. So, if you're expecting originality from this one, you're going to be severely disappointed, which is probably why many say this is the worst movie in the series. However, I don't quite agree. I understand why most people say why it's the worst, but I don't agree. Because it still has more than a few things going for it that can make up mostly for its faults. Peter Cushing is once again fantastic in this role. It has the coolest mad laboratory and overall set design of the entire series so far, obviously showing off a bigger budget than the previous two movies, and it's a beautiful movie visually. It still manages to have a great ending, even if it is the same ending we've seen before in pretty much every other Frankenstein movie. It's still under 2 hours long, making it a short and easy watch, and even if it's unoriginal, it's pleasantly familiar enough to be an entertaining experience. Overall, it kind of just depends on which way you look at it. If you look at it for originality, or more diversity from the usual like the previous two movies, you're going to find this movie stale and derivative. But if you're like me, and a lot like James Rolfe as Cinemassacre, if you look at it more as a best-of compilation of the classic Universal series done in color, you'll find a decent film that can be fun to watch. It definitely could have been better, but I have seen far worse horror movies than this. It falls into the guilty pleasure category, but I argue the movie itself is decent. It has a lot of problems. It definitely didn't have to needlessly reboot everything, but it has more than enough still intact to make it worth watching. Sure, story-wise, it's an absolute mess, but if you can get around that, you have a nice little nostalgic movie. Or, as James Rolfe put it, the most Frankenstein of the Frankenstein series. Make of that what you will. What I make of that is a final verdict of a 6 out of 10. It's a huge fall from the previous two movies, but I don't think it's bad. It's decent. It's a guilty pleasure movie. It has a lot of problems, but it still manages to be pretty entertaining. Well, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when we tackle the next installment of the series, which I believe is... What is the next one? Give me 1 second. See you next time for Frankenstein Created Woman.